The moment Victoria Kensington stepped onto the auction block in the dusty town square of Eagar, Arizona, still wearing her cream-colored wedding dress with its delicate lace sleeves and pearl buttons, she knew her life had become a nightmare from which there would be no waking. The dress, once pristine and beautiful, now bore the stains of travel and tears, the hem darkened with the red dust of the Arizona Territory. It was May of 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the gathering crowd of miners, ranchers, and drifters who had come to see what goods the traveling auctioneer had brought to their remote mountain town. Victoria stood with her hands bound loosely in front of her, not to prevent escape but as a symbol of her indenture. Her auburn hair, which had been carefully curled and pinned just 3 days prior, now hung in tangled waves down her back. Her green eyes, once bright with hope and dreams of a future, now stared vacantly at the crowd that had assembled. She was 22 years old, and everything she had believed about her life had proven to be a lie. The auctioneer, a portly man named Samuel Hicks with a voice that carried across the square, was explaining her situation to the potential buyers. "This here young lady finds herself in unfortunate circumstances, gentlemen. Her intended husband, one Randolph Whitmore of Boston, Massachusetts, departed this earth quite suddenly on their wedding day. Tragic business, truly tragic. A heart ailment, the doctor said, left her with nothing but debts, as it turns out the deceased had been living well beyond his means. His creditors seized everything, and Miss Kensington here took on his debts as his widow, though the marriage was never properly consummated. She has agreed to indenture herself to pay off the sum of $800, plus the cost of her transport west." Victoria closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry again. She had no more tears left anyway. The past 3 days had been a blur of horror and disbelief. Randolph had collapsed at the altar, clutching his chest, and died within minutes despite the doctor's frantic efforts. Before Victoria could even properly grieve, men in dark suits had appeared at the boarding house where she had been staying, informing her that Randolph owed money to half of Boston's merchants and moneylenders. As his widow, they claimed, she was responsible for settling his accounts. She had nothing. Her own father had died 2 years earlier, leaving her with barely enough to survive. Her mother had passed when she was just a child. Randolph had seemed like salvation when he had courted her with gifts and promises of a comfortable life in the West, where he claimed to have business interests. All lies. Every bit of it. The gifts had been purchased on credit he never intended to repay. The business interests did not exist. And now Victoria was standing on an auction block in a town she had never heard of, about to be sold to the highest bidder like a piece of livestock. "Do I hear $50 to start?" the auctioneer called out. "She is educated, gentlemen, can read and write do-sums. Would make an excellent housekeeper or shop assistant. Contract is for 3 years of service. $50, called a grizzled prospector near the front. 60, countered a saloon owner, eyeing Victoria with an expression that made her skin crawl. 75, came another voice. Victoria kept her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the crowd's heads, trying to detach herself from what was happening. She had considered running when they had first arrived in Eagar that morning, but where would she go? She had no money, no horse, no supplies. The Arizona Territory was vast and unforgiving. She would die of thirst or exposure within days if she tried to strike out on her own. $100, the saloon owner called, his voice eager. The bidding had slowed. Victoria felt her stomach turn. The saloon owner had been staring at her in a way that suggested he had no intention of using her services for housekeeping. She had heard whispers about what happened to indentured women who ended up in saloons and brothels. Death might be preferable. Going once for $100, the auctioneer announced. Victoria's heart hammered in her chest. She opened her mouth, though she had no idea what she intended to say. Perhaps to plead, to beg someone, anyone, to save her from that fate. $500. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep and steady. Every head turned to see who had spoken. Victoria's gaze followed, and she saw a tall man stepping forward through the parting crowd. He wore dusty work clothes, a worn brown vest over a blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. As he moved closer, she could make out more details. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and strong features. His jaw was set with determination, and his dark eyes were fixed on the auctioneer, not on Victoria. "Did you say 500, sir?" the auctioneer asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I did," the man confirmed, reaching the front of the crowd. $500, cash money." He pulled a leather pouch from his belt and held it up. The saloon owner glared at the newcomer. $550. The tall man did not hesitate. $800. The full amount of her debt plus transport costs. "I will settle her accounts in full and pay you your commission, Mr. Hicks. She will owe no one anything." A collective gasp went through the crowd. That was an enormous sum of money, more than most men in Eager would see in 2 years of hard labor. Victoria stared at the man, trying to understand why anyone would pay such an amount for an indentured servant. The auctioneer looked flustered. That is more than generous, sir." "Are you certain?" "I am certain." "Do we have an agreement?" Samuel Hicks nodded quickly. "Sold to." He paused, realizing he did not know the buyer's name. "Franklin Grant," the man said. "I run a ranch about 10 miles north of here." The auctioneer gestured for Victoria to step down from the platform. Her legs felt weak as she descended the wooden steps, her wedding dress rustling around her. Franklin Grant moved forward to meet her, and she got her first close look at her new owner. He had a strong, honest face with deep-set brown eyes that held a kindness she had not expected. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and he had a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way that spoke of a life spent outdoors. "Miss Kensington," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I know you are frightened, but I give you my word that you will be treated with respect under my roof. You have my promise on that." Victoria did not know what to say. She nodded mutely, her throat too tight for words. Franklin turned to the auctioneer and spent several minutes settling the financial arrangements, counting out gold coins and paper money from his pouch. Victoria stood off to the side, aware of the crowd's curious stares and whispered speculation. She felt numb, unable to process what had just happened. When the transaction was complete, Franklin received a document that outlined the terms of Victoria's indenture. Though as he had paid her debts in full, the terms were largely irrelevant. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket, then turned back to Victoria. "Do you have any belongings?" he asked gently. "A small bag," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "At the general store." "Let us collect it then. My wagon is just down the street." Victoria walked beside him through the dusty streets of Eager, acutely aware of the stares they were attracting. The town was small, nestled in the high country of eastern Arizona at an elevation that made the air thin and cool despite the season. Ponderosa pines dotted the surrounding hills, and the white mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow even in May. It was beautiful country, so different from Boston that it might as well have been another world. At the general store, Franklin retrieved her carpetbag from where the auctioneer's men had left it. It contained all that remained of her life: 2 changes of clothes, a brush, a few personal items, and a small leather journal her father had given her. Franklin carried it easily with one hand and led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to two draft horses. He helped her up onto the bench seat with surprising gentleness, his hand under her elbow steady and respectful. Then he climbed up beside her, released the brake, and clicked his tongue to get the horses moving. They rolled out of Eager, heading north on a well-worn dirt road that wound through the pine forests. They rode in silence for nearly an hour. Victoria kept her hands folded in her lap, trying not to think about what might await her at Franklin Grant's ranch. He had seemed kind, but she had been deceived by seeming kindness before. Randolph had been charming and attentive during their courtship, and look how that had ended. Finally, Franklin spoke. "I suppose you are wondering why I paid so much for your contract." Victoria turned to look at him. "The thought had crossed my mind," she admitted. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I need help at the ranch. My mother passed away this past winter, and I have been managing on my own since then. It is a lot of work for one person. I grow hay, raise some cattle and horses. There is a vegetable garden that has gone to seed, chickens that need tending, a house that needs cleaning and mending. I could have hired someone from town, but—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "When I saw you standing up there in that wedding dress, looking so lost and afraid, and I heard that saloon keeper bidding on you, I knew I could not let that happen. So you bought me out of pity." Victoria heard the bitterness in her own voice and regretted it immediately. Franklin shook his head. "Not pity, something closer to recognizing someone who deserved better than the hand fate had dealt them. I know what it is like to lose everything in a single day, Miss Kensington. When my father died 5 years ago, he left debts I am still working to pay off. I nearly lost the ranch, so when I say I understand what you are going through, I mean it." Victoria studied his profile, seeing the truth of his words in the set of his jaw and the distant look in his eyes. "I am sorry for your losses," she said quietly, "and I am sorry for yours. Losing your intended husband on your wedding day and then being forced into servitude to pay his debts. It is not right, it is not justice. The law did not see it that way." "The law is often an ass," Franklin said bluntly, and despite everything, Victoria felt a small smile tug at her lips. They crested a ridge and Franklin pointed ahead. "There, that is home." Victoria looked and saw a valley opening up before them, lush with spring grass. A creek wound through the center, lined with cottonwoods that were just leafing out. The ranch house sat on a slight rise, a sturdy structure built of logs and stone with a covered porch running along the front. There were several outbuildings, a large barn, corrals with horses, and fields that had been recently plowed for planting. "It is beautiful," Victoria said, meaning it. "It is home," Franklin agreed. "Or at least, I hope you will come to think of it that way." They descended into the valley as the sun began its slide toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. As they approached the house, Victoria could see that it was well maintained despite the loss of Franklin's mother. The porch was swept clean, the windows were intact, and flowers had been planted in beds along the front, though they were somewhat overgrown with weeds. Franklin brought the wagon to a stop near the house and jumped down, then came around to help Victoria descend. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her, strong and warm through the fabric of her dress. "Careful," he said. "The journey has been long. You must be exhausted." She was. Exhausted and overwhelmed and still not entirely sure this was real. Franklin retrieved her carpetbag and led her up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior of the house was dim and cool after the bright afternoon sun. Victoria's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the main room that served as both kitchen and living area. There was a large stone fireplace on one wall, a sturdy table with chairs, a cast iron stove, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Everything was neat, but had the slightly dusty air of a house kept by a man who was too busy to do more than the bare minimum. "There are 2 bedrooms," Franklin explained, setting her bag down. "The one on the left was my mother's. You will have that one. I use the one on the right. There is a washroom out back with a pump, and the privy is beyond that. I will draw some water for you so you can clean up, and then I will make us some supper." "You do not expect me to cook?" Victoria asked, surprised. Franklin turned to look at her. "Miss Kensington, you have had one of the worst weeks of your life. You lost your husband, your freedom, and your dignity all in a matter of days. The least I can do is let you rest for an evening before we discuss what your duties will be here. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I am a passable cook. I will not poison you." Victoria felt something tight in her chest loosen just a fraction. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and went back outside. Victoria heard him working the pump, filling buckets with water. She stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do with herself. After a moment, she moved to look out the window. The view was breathtaking, all rolling grassland and distant mountains turning purple in the fading light. It was so far removed from the cramped streets and brick buildings of Boston that she felt as though she had traveled not just across the continent, but to an entirely different world. Franklin returned with 2 buckets of water, which he carried to the washroom. He showed her where the soap and towels were kept, then left her alone. Victoria closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. She looked down at her wedding dress, at the stains and tears that marked it. With shaking hands, she began to undo the long row of pearl buttons down the back, twisting awkwardly to reach them all. When the dress finally fell away, she stepped out of it and stood in just her chemise and petticoat. She folded the dress carefully, though she did not know why. She would never wear it again. It represented nothing but broken promises and shattered dreams. Still, it seemed wrong to just discard it. She washed as best she could with the bucket of water, scrubbing away the dust and grime of travel. The cold water felt good against her skin, clearing some of the fog from her mind. When she was done, she dug through her carpetbag and found a simple blue cotton dress, one of the few practical items she had packed for her journey west. She put it on along with fresh undergarments and braided her damp hair over one shoulder. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror that hung on the wall, she barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner than it had been a week ago, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and grief. When she emerged from the washroom, she found Franklin at the stove, frying bacon and potatoes in a large cast iron skillet. The smell made her stomach growl, reminding her that she had barely eaten in days. He glanced over his shoulder at her and nodded approvingly. "You look more comfortable. Please sit down. Supper will be ready in a few minutes." Victoria sat at the table, folding her hands in her lap. She watched him move around the kitchen with easy familiarity, flipping the food in the skillet, cutting bread from a fresh loaf, pouring water into tin cups. When the food was ready, he divided it between 2 plates and brought them to the table, then sat down across from her. "It is not fancy," he said, "but it will fill your belly." Victoria picked up her fork and took a bite. The food was simple but well prepared, seasoned with salt and pepper and cooked just right. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger as her body remembered it needed sustenance. Franklin ate as well, not speaking, giving her space. When they had both finished, he cleared the plates and set them in a basin to wash later. "Miss Kensington," he said, sitting back down, "we should talk about how this arrangement is going to work. Victoria tensed, her brief moment of relaxation evaporating. Of course. Franklin leaned back in his chair, his expression serious but not unkind. Legally, I own your contract of indenture. You owe me 3 years of service in exchange for the debt I paid, but I am not a man who believes in owning people. My father fought against slavery, and he taught me that every person has a right to their own life and their own choices. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the folded document, the contract that bound her to him. Before Victoria could react, he stood up, walked to the fireplace, and tossed the paper into the embers of the banked fire. It caught immediately, curling and blackening as flames consumed it. Victoria stared, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. What? What did you just do? I destroyed your contract, Franklin said simply. You are free, Miss Kensington. You owe me nothing. You can leave tomorrow if you wish. I will give you supplies and enough money to get to Albuquerque or Santa Fe, wherever you want to go. I do not understand, Victoria said, her voice trembling. You paid $800 for me and now you are just letting me go. Franklin returned to his seat, meeting her eyes steadily. I paid $800 to make sure you did not end up as some saloon keeper's property, forced into a life you did not choose. I did not buy you, Miss Kensington. I freed you. What you do with that freedom is up to you. Victoria felt tears welling in her eyes, the first tears she had been able to shed since the numbness had set in. Why would you do that? You do not even know me. Because it was the right thing to do, Franklin said quietly. Because I have a sister back in Missouri, and if she were ever in a situation like yours, I would hope some stranger would help her. Because when I looked at you standing on that platform in your wedding dress, I saw someone who had been dealt nothing but bad luck and deserved a chance at something better. The tears spilled over, running down Victoria's cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep inside her. All the fear, all the grief, all the despair she had been holding back came pouring out. She cried for Randolph, despite his lies and debts. She cried for herself, for the life she had thought she would have. She cried for her lost innocence and the harsh reality she had been forced to face. Franklin did not try to stop her or comfort her. He simply sat there, giving her the space to release her anguish. When her sobs finally subsided into hiccups and sniffles, he handed her a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "Thank you," she managed to say, dabbing at her eyes. "You have been through hell," Franklin said gently. "You are entitled to cry about it." Victoria took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "No family, no friends here, no money of my own. Even if you give me traveling money, what would I do? I am a woman alone in a territory I do not know. I would not last a week." "Then stay," Franklin said. "Not as my servant, but as my employee. I truly do need help running this ranch. I can pay you a fair wage, provide room and board, and you will have your own space and your own life. When you have saved enough money and decided what you want to do with your future, you can leave with my blessing. Or if you find that you like it here, you can stay. The choice is entirely yours." Victoria looked at him, this strange man who had appeared out of nowhere and changed the course of her life. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Franklin was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "My mother always said that kindness is the only thing that makes life bearable. She showed kindness to everyone she met, even when times were hard and we had little to give. When she died, I made a promise to her that I would try to be the kind of man she raised me to be. That means helping people when I can, treating everyone with respect, and doing the right thing even when it is difficult or costly." "You must have loved her very much," Victoria said softly. "I did. She was the best person I have ever known." Franklin's voice was thick with emotion. "This house feels empty without her. I would welcome the company if I am being honest, and I really do need help with the work, so you would be doing me a favor by staying." Victoria thought about his offer. It was more than generous, more than she had any right to expect. She could leave, try to make her way in some distant city, but doing what? She had few skills that would earn her a living. She could read and write and do basic arithmetic, but so could many people. She had no training as a seamstress, cook, or teacher. She would likely end up in exactly the same position she had been in today, only without someone like Franklin Grant to save her. Or she could stay here, in this beautiful valley with its clean air and wide skies. She could work for a fair wage, save her money, and figure out what she wanted from life. She could have time to heal, to grieve, to become herself again. "I will stay," she said. "For now, at least, and I will work to earn my keep. You have done more than enough for me already." Franklin smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Then we have an agreement. Partners, in a sense. You help me keep this ranch running, and I provide you with a safe place to live and a chance to build a new life." "Partners," Victoria agreed, and found herself smiling back despite everything. They spent the next hour discussing the practical details. Franklin explained the daily routine of the ranch, the animals that needed tending, the garden that needed replanting, the house that needed thorough cleaning and mending. Victoria listened carefully, mentally cataloging all the tasks. It was a lot of work, but she had never been afraid of hard work. When the conversation wound down, Franklin showed her to the bedroom that had been his mother's. It was a simple room with a double bed covered in a faded quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Personal items still dotted the surfaces: a hairbrush, a small jewelry box, a Bible on the bedside table. "I have not had the heart to pack away her things yet," Franklin admitted. "If they bother you, I can move them." "No," Victoria said quickly. "They are fine. They make the room feel lived in." "Loved," Franklin nodded. "She would have liked you, I think. She always had a soft spot for people who had been dealt a rough hand. Get some rest, Miss Kensington. Tomorrow will come soon enough." "Please," Victoria said. "Call me Victoria. After everything, formality seems silly." "Victoria," Franklin agreed, "and you should call me Franklin. Good night." "Good night." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was comfortable, stuffed with what felt like feathers. She ran her hand over the quilt, noting the careful stitching, the way the pattern of interlocking rings created a larger design. Franklin's mother had made this, she realized, putting hours of work into creating something beautiful and functional. Victoria changed into her nightgown and climbed under the covers. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender, as though they had been stored with sachets. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. An owl hooted somewhere nearby. The horses in the corral whinnied softly to each other. The wind rustled through the pine trees surrounding the house. For the first time in days, Victoria felt something other than despair. It was not quite hope, not yet, but it was the absence of hopelessness. Franklin Grant had given her a gift beyond price: her freedom and her dignity. She did not know what the future held, but for tonight, she was safe and warm and fed. That would have to be enough. She closed her eyes and, to her surprise, fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Victoria woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she was disoriented, not recognizing where she was. Then memory came flooding back: the auction, Franklin, the ranch. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and looked around the small bedroom in the clear light of morning. She dressed quickly in her work dress and braided her hair, then ventured out into the main room. Franklin was already up, building a fire in the stove. He looked over when he heard her footsteps and nodded a greeting. "Morning. I hope the rooster did not wake you too early. He is enthusiastic about his job." "It is fine," Victoria said. "What time is it?" "About 6. The animals need feeding, and I wanted to get an early start on mending the fence in the north pasture. One of the posts rotted through over the winter." He straightened up from the stove. "There is coffee on, and I can make breakfast if you want to wait, or you can help yourself to bread and preserves." "I can make breakfast," Victoria offered, "if you show me where everything is." Franklin looked surprised but pleased. "You do not have to start working today." "I meant what I said about you resting." "I have rested," Victoria said firmly, "and I would rather be useful than sit around feeling sorry for myself. So please show me your kitchen and then go do what you need to do with your fences." A slow smile spread across Franklin's face. "All right then. Let me show you where things are." He gave her a quick tour of the kitchen, pointing out the stores of flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, and dried beans. There were eggs from the chickens, bacon and salt pork hanging in the cold cellar, and fresh milk from the cow he milked every morning. Victoria took mental notes, already planning what she could make. "The cow is named Buttercup, and she is out in the barn," Franklin said. "I already milked her this morning. The chickens are in the coop behind the house. They usually lay around mid-morning. There is a vegetable garden on the south side that needs a lot of work if you are feeling ambitious." "I will see what I can do," Victoria promised. Franklin grabbed his hat and work gloves. "I will be back by midday for lunch. If you need anything, just ring the bell on the porch and I will hear it from the pasture." After he left, Victoria poured herself a cup of coffee and stood at the window, sipping it and looking out at the ranch in the morning light. Everything seemed fresh and clean, washed in golden sunshine. She could see Franklin walking toward the barn, his stride long and easy. He disappeared inside, then emerged a few minutes later leading a horse, which he saddled quickly, before riding off toward the northern end of the property. Victoria turned her attention to breakfast. She found a mixing bowl and began making biscuits, measuring out flour and baking powder, cutting in lard and adding milk until she had a soft dough. While the biscuits baked, she fried eggs and bacon, setting them aside to keep warm. When everything was ready, she prepared 2 plates, covering Franklin's to keep it hot for when he returned. She ate her own breakfast slowly, savoring the food. Then she began exploring the house more thoroughly, assessing what needed to be done. The floors needed sweeping and scrubbing. The windows needed washing. Dust covered most surfaces. Franklin's bedroom door was open, and she glanced inside to find a neatly made bed but clothing piled on a chair and dirty dishes on a side table. Victoria started with the dishes, heating water and washing everything she could find. Then she swept the floors, working methodically from one end of the house to the other. It felt good to be doing something productive, to be using her body and her hands. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, which wanted to spiral into dark thoughts about Randolph, and the wedding that was not and the debts that had cost her everything. By the time Franklin returned at noon, the house looked considerably better. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the clean floors and sparkling windows, and whistled appreciatively. "You have been busy," he said. "I told you I wanted to be useful. Your lunch is on the stove, still warm." Franklin washed his hands at the pump outside, then came in and uncovered the plate she had prepared. He sat down and took a bite of biscuit, and his eyebrows rose. "These are excellent, much better than anything I can make." "My mother taught me to bake when I was young," Victoria said. "It is one of the few useful skills I have." "I would not say that. You have clearly been working hard all morning. The house looks better than it has in months." Franklin ate with obvious enjoyment. "If you keep cooking like this, I might have to pay you double." Victoria felt a small glow of pride at his words. After lunch, she asked him to show her the chicken coop and the vegetable garden so she could assess what needed to be done. The chickens were friendly enough, clucking and pecking at the ground around her feet. The coop needed cleaning, but that could wait for another day. The garden, however, was a disaster. Weeds had taken over the beds, and the fence that was supposed to keep out rabbits and deer had several large gaps. "My mother was the gardener," Franklin said apologetically. "I have been meaning to fix it up, but there is always something else that needs doing." "I can work on this," Victoria said. "I will need tools, though, and seeds if you have them." Franklin showed her where the garden tools were stored in the barn, along with several packets of seeds his mother had saved from the previous year. Victoria spent the rest of the afternoon pulling weeds, her hands deep in the warm earth. It was hard work, but satisfying. By the time the sun began to lower toward the western horizon, she had cleared 2 of the 4 beds and her back was aching, but in a good way. At supper that evening, she and Franklin talked more easily than they had the night before. He told her about the ranch, how his father had homesteaded the land in the 1860s after the Civil War, working for years to build it into something that could support a family. Franklin had been born here, had grown up learning every aspect of ranching and farming. His father's death had been a blow, but he and his mother had kept the ranch going together until her passing. "You have other family?" Victoria asked. "A sister, like I mentioned. Sarah. She married a merchant in Missouri and has 3 children now." "We write to each other a few times a year, but it has been a long time since I have seen her. And you, any siblings?" "I was an only child. My mother died when I was 7. My father raised me alone, working as a clerk. He did his best, but we never had much. When he passed 2 years ago, I was left with almost nothing. That is why Randolph seemed like such a godsend. A man who wanted to marry me, who promised stability and a future. I should have known it was too good to be true." "You could not have known he was lying," Franklin said gently. "Con men are skilled at deception. That is how they make their living, I suppose. Still, I feel foolish for believing him. Being trusting is not the same as being foolish. Do not blame yourself for someone else's dishonesty." They fell into a comfortable routine over the following days. Victoria rose early each morning to make breakfast and tend to the chickens. She spent her days cleaning the house, working in the garden, mending clothes, and preparing meals. Franklin handled the heavier ranch work, feeding and training the horses, tending the cattle, mending fences and buildings, cutting hay. They shared lunch and supper together, talking about their days and slowly learning more about each other. Victoria found herself looking forward to these conversations. Franklin was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and thoughtful opinions on everything from politics to literature. She was surprised to discover he was well-read, with a small collection of books that had belonged to his mother. She believed education was important, Franklin explained when Victoria commented on the books. "She taught me to read when I was young, and we would read together in the evenings. I have kept up the habit." "What do you like to read?" Victoria asked. "History, mostly. Some poetry." "My mother loved Shakespeare, though I confess I find it heavy-going sometimes." "What about you?" "I like novels," Victoria admitted. "Stories about other people, other lives. They help me forget about my own troubles for a while." "We will have to take a trip into Eager sometime and see if the general store has any new books," Franklin said. "Or we could order some from Santa Fe." As the days turned into weeks, Victoria began to feel a sense of belonging she had not expected. The ranch was becoming familiar. the rhythms of the work soothing in their predictability. She learned the names and personalities of all the animals. Buttercup the cow with her placid temperament, the rooster she dubbed Napoleon for his imperious attitude, the horses in the corral who came to the fence looking for treats whenever she passed by. Franklin was an attentive employer and a good companion. He never made her feel like a servant, always treating her as an equal. He asked her opinion on decisions about the ranch, listened to her suggestions, and gave her freedom to organize the house and garden as she saw fit. Most importantly, he never made her feel uncomfortable or afraid. His behavior was always respectful, even when they worked in close quarters. Victoria had not realized how much she had been bracing for betrayal until she began to relax. Every day that passed without Franklin showing his true colors helped ease the wariness she had been carrying. She was coming to realize exactly what he appeared to be. A good man doing his best to build a life from hard work and honest dealing. One evening in early June, about 3 weeks after Victoria had arrived at the ranch, they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the mountains. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and the wildflowers that were blooming in the meadows. Franklin was whittling a piece of wood, his knife making soft scraping sounds while Victoria shelled peas for the next day's meal. "I have been thinking," Franklin said suddenly, "about what happened to you in Eager, about that auction." Victoria's hand stilled. She had been trying not to think about that day, pushing it to the back of her mind. "What about it?" she asked carefully. Franklin set down his whittling. "You were standing up there in your wedding dress, that dress you wore to marry a man who turned out to be a liar and a cheat. And I realized something today. Those vows you took, they were never real. He did not honor them. He left you with nothing but pain and debt." "That is true," Victoria said quietly. Franklin turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You deserve better than that. You deserve a wedding that means something, a husband who will honor his promises to you." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" Franklin stood up and moved to stand in front of her, then knelt down on one knee. Victoria's heart began to pound as she realized what he was about to do. "Victoria Kensington, I know we have not known each other long, but in these past weeks I have come to admire your strength, your kindness, and your spirit. You have brought life back to this house and to my days. I find myself looking forward to every morning because I know I will share it with you. I am not a wealthy man, and I cannot offer you a life of luxury, but I can offer you a home, a partner, and a promise that I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Will you marry me? Will you let me make those vows real, the ones you should have been able to take with someone worthy of you?" Victoria stared at him, her mind reeling. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Franklin waited patiently, his dark eyes earnest and hopeful. She finally managed. "This is so sudden. We barely know each other." "I know," he said. "And if you need time to think about it, I understand. I will wait as long as you need. But I wanted you to know how I feel. These past weeks with you here have been the happiest I have been since my mother died. I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay, not as my employee, but as my wife, my partner in every sense of the word." Victoria felt tears welling in her eyes. "You are asking me to trust again, to believe in promises again. After everything that happened with Randolph, I am afraid." Franklin reached up and gently took her hand. "I know you are afraid. I would be too in your place. But I am not Randolph. I will not lie to you or leave you to face his mistakes. I will stand beside you, come what may. That is my promise, and I mean it with every fiber of my being." Victoria looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from work, hers smaller but also showing the effects of her labor in the garden and house. She thought about the past weeks, how safe she had felt, how comfortable. She thought about Franklin's kindness, his integrity, the way he had freed her from bondage instead of taking advantage of her vulnerable position. She thought about the future. If she said no, what would happen? She could stay on as his employee, but things would be awkward now that he had revealed his feelings. Or she could leave, take the money she had earned and try to make a life somewhere else, always alone, always looking over her shoulder for the next disaster. Or she could say yes. She could take a leap of faith and trust that Franklin meant what he said. She could build a life here with a man who had already proven himself to be honorable and true. Yes, she whispered. Franklin's face lit up with joy. Yes, yes, Victoria said more firmly. I will marry you, Franklin Grant. I will take those vows again, and this time they will be real. Franklin stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Victoria rested her head against his chest, hearing the rapid beating of his heart, and felt something shift inside her. The fear and pain that had been weighing her down began to lift, replaced by something fragile and new: hope. They were married 2 weeks later in Eager, with the local minister officiating and several of Franklin's friends from town serving as witnesses. Victoria wore a new dress that Franklin had bought for her, a soft green calico that matched her eyes. It was not a fancy wedding dress, but it was pretty and practical, and it belonged to her future, not her past. The ceremony was simple and short. When Franklin slipped a plain gold band onto her finger and promised to love and honor her all the days of his life, Victoria believed him. And when she made her own vows, speaking the words clearly and without hesitation, she meant them with her whole heart. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at the general store, with cake and lemonade provided by the storekeeper's wife, who had been delighted to help once she heard the story of how Franklin had rescued Victoria from the auction. The townspeople who attended were warm and welcoming, congratulating the newlyweds and wishing them well. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, husband and wife now in truth, Victoria felt a peace she had not known was possible. Franklin held her hand as he drove the wagon, his thumb making small circles on her palm. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes," Victoria said, and realized it was true. "I am happy." That night, in the bedroom that had been Franklin's mother's and was now theirs to share, Victoria stood nervously as Franklin closed the door behind them. He seemed to sense her anxiety and moved slowly, giving her time to adjust to this new reality. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said gently. "I meant what I said in my vows. I will honor and respect you, Victoria, always." "I know," she said. "I trust you," and she did. Franklin approached her carefully, his hands gentle as he cupped her face and kissed her for the first time. It was soft and sweet, nothing rushed or demanding. Victoria kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder. What followed was tender and careful, Franklin taking his time to make sure Victoria was comfortable, checking in with her, making it clear that her pleasure and comfort mattered as much as his own. It was nothing like what Victoria had expected based on the whispered warnings she had received from married women back in Boston. There was no pain, only warmth and intimacy, and a growing connection that felt right and good. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Victoria's head on Franklin's chest, his arm around her shoulders. She could hear his heart beating steady and strong beneath her ear. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For being patient, for being kind, for being you." Franklin kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for saying yes, for giving me a chance, for trusting me even though you had every reason not to." "I am glad I did," Victoria said. "I think this is going to be a good life." "I will do everything in my power to make sure it is," Franklin promised. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Victoria's life. She and Franklin fell into an easy partnership, working side by side during the day and spending their evenings together, talking and reading and simply enjoying each other's company. The ranch prospered under their joint efforts. The garden produced a bounty of vegetables that Victoria preserved for winter. The cattle grew fat on summer grass. The horses Franklin trained sold for good prices. As summer turned to fall, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before she said anything to Franklin. When she finally told him one evening in September, he swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Victoria asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy? I am over the moon. You have given me everything, Victoria, a home, a partnership, and now a child. I could not ask for more." Franklin became even more attentive during her pregnancy, constantly asking if she felt well, if she needed anything, if she was working too hard. Victoria found his concern endearing, though she had to remind him regularly that she was pregnant, not ill, and perfectly capable of managing her daily tasks. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and cold winds, Victoria spent more time indoors, sewing baby clothes and preparing the small nursery they had set up in a corner of their bedroom. Franklin kept the house warm and made sure she had everything she needed. They passed the long winter evenings playing cards, reading aloud to each other, and making plans for their growing family. In March of 1883, Victoria went into labor during a late winter snowstorm. Franklin rode through the blizzard to fetch the midwife from town, returning with her just as Victoria's contractions were becoming unbearable. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Franklin stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling with healthy lungs, Franklin had tears streaming down his face. The midwife cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Victoria's arms. "He is perfect," Victoria whispered, exhausted but elated. "He is beautiful. Just like his mother," Franklin said, his voice thick with emotion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Victoria looked down at the tiny face of their son, his eyes squeezed shut, his little hands waving in the air. "I was thinking Thomas," she said, "after my father." "Thomas Grant," Franklin said, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Thomas." The baby's first few months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and constant feedings, but Victoria had never felt more fulfilled. Franklin was a devoted father, getting up with her during night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just holding his son and staring at him in wonder. As Thomas grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, smiling baby, the ranch continued to thrive. Franklin hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, giving him more time to spend with his family. Victoria managed the household and garden while caring for Thomas, somehow juggling all the responsibilities with grace and efficiency. On their first wedding anniversary in June of 1883, Franklin surprised Victoria with a trip into town. They left Thomas with the midwife, who had become a good friend, and spent the day browsing the shops and having lunch at the hotel restaurant. Franklin bought Victoria a beautiful shawl made of soft wool, dyed a deep blue that complemented her coloring. "I wanted to get you something special," he said as she admired it, "to show you how much this year has meant to me." "You did not have to get me anything," Victoria protested, though she was touched by the gesture. You give me everything I need every single day. I know I do not have to. I wanted to. You have transformed my life, Victoria. A year ago, I was living alone in that house, going through the motions, surviving but not really living. Now I have a wife I love, a son who is the light of my life, and a home that feels full and complete. That is worth celebrating. Victoria leaned over and kissed him, not caring that they were in public. I love you, Franklin Grant, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, more than words can express. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew into an energetic toddler, then a curious little boy. Victoria became pregnant again when Thomas was 2, giving birth to a daughter they named Sarah after Franklin's sister. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they named David. The ranch continued to prosper. Franklin expanded their cattle operation and built a larger barn. Victoria's garden grew every year, producing enough vegetables to sell the surplus in town. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, with enough to meet their needs and a little set aside for the future. Victoria sometimes thought about the day she had stood on the auction block in her wedding dress, terrified and hopeless. It seemed like another lifetime now, something that had happened to a different person. The woman she had been then, the frightened girl who had lost everything, had been transformed into someone strong and capable and loved. She and Franklin had built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered. They had their children, their home, their work, and most importantly, they had each other. The vows they had taken on that June day in 1882 had proven to be as real and lasting as any promise could be. One evening in the summer of 1887, 5 years after their wedding, Victoria and Franklin sat on the porch watching their 3 children play in the yard. Thomas, now 4, was showing his younger siblings how to catch grasshoppers. Sarah, 2 years old, was more interested in picking wildflowers. Baby David was crawling determinedly after his older brother, babbling happily. "Can you believe this is our life?" Victoria asked, leaning against Franklin's shoulder. "Some days I still have to pinch myself," Franklin admitted. "When I saw you standing on that auction block, I never imagined it would lead to this. I just wanted to help someone who needed it. You did more than help me. You saved me. You gave me a future when I thought I had none." "We saved each other," Franklin corrected. "I was lost when you came here, Victoria. I was just going through the motions, working myself to exhaustion to avoid feeling lonely. You brought joy back into my life. You made this house a home again." Victoria turned to kiss him, a sweet, lingering kiss that spoke of love and gratitude and contentment. When they parted, both were smiling. "I am glad you paid $800 for me," Victoria said with a teasing lilt to her voice. "Best money I ever spent," Franklin replied, making her laugh. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the Grant family gathered together on the porch. Franklin held baby David while Victoria helped Sarah climb onto her lap. Thomas leaned against his father's leg, tired from his day of playing. "Tell us a story, Papa," Thomas requested. "What kind of story?" Franklin asked. "A love story, about you and Mama." Franklin and Victoria exchanged a look, both smiling. "All right," Franklin said. "Once upon a time, there was a cowboy who lived on a ranch in the mountains. He worked hard every day, but he was lonely. Then one day, he rode into town and saw a beautiful lady who needed help. She was standing in front of everyone, wearing a wedding dress, and the cowboy knew right away that she was special. So he did something brave. He offered to help her, even though he did not know what would happen. And do you know what?" "What?" Thomas asked, wide-eyed. "It turned out to be the best decision he ever made. Because that beautiful lady came to live at the ranch, and the cowboy fell in love with her. And she fell in love with him too. And they got married for real and promised to love each other forever. And then they had 3 wonderful children, and they all lived happily together on the ranch. "That is a good story," Thomas said, yawning. "It is a true story," Victoria added, "the very best kind." As darkness fell and the children began to nod off, Franklin and Victoria carried them inside one by one, tucking them into their beds. Then they returned to the porch, sitting close together in the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other deeply and loved each other completely. The stars came out, brilliant in the clear mountain air, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Victoria rested her head on Franklin's shoulder, feeling perfectly at peace. She had traveled a long and difficult road to get here, through grief and fear and uncertainty. But every step had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For seeing me that day. For choosing to help. For asking me to stay. For making those vows real." Franklin wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for building this life with me." They sat together under the stars, 2 souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and forged something beautiful and lasting from that first encounter. The ranch spread out around them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside the house, their children slept safely, loved and cared for. Victoria thought about the wedding dress she had worn twice, once in sorrow and once in joy. She had packed it away in a trunk in the attic, unable to throw it away but unwilling to look at it regularly. Perhaps one day, when Sarah was old enough, Victoria would show it to her daughter and tell her the whole story. She would explain how sometimes life takes away everything you thought you wanted, only to give you something better than you ever imagined. She would tell her daughter about standing on an auction block feeling hopeless and afraid, and about the cowboy who had stepped forward and changed everything. She would explain that real love is not about grand gestures or empty promises, but about showing up every day and choosing to be kind, to be honest, to be true. Most of all, she would tell Sarah that even when life seems darkest, even when you have lost everything, there is always hope for a new beginning. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, in the form of a stranger with a kind heart and the courage to do what is right. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, Franklin and Victoria finally went inside. They checked on the children one last time, pulling blankets up over small sleeping forms, then retired to their own bedroom. They changed for bed and climbed under the quilts that Victoria had made over the years, each one a labor of love. In the darkness, Franklin reached for Victoria's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Victoria replied. "Always." And she meant it. The vows they had taken on that June day, the promises they had made to each other, had proven to be more real and lasting than any words spoken in haste or desperation. They had built a marriage on a foundation of respect, trust, and genuine affection that had deepened into abiding love. As Victoria drifted off to sleep, safe and warm beside her husband, she felt gratitude wash over her. Life had taken her on an unexpected journey, from Boston to the Arizona Territory, from heartbreak to happiness, from despair to hope. She had been tested and tried, had faced losses that seemed insurmountable, but she had survived. More than survived. She had thrived. She had found her place in the world, her purpose, her person. The Wild West had seemed harsh and unforgiving when she first arrived, a dangerous frontier where anything could happen. And it was all those things. But it was also a place where second chances were possible, where people could reinvent themselves, where a woman in a wedding dress and a cowboy with a kind heart could find each other and build something beautiful. The Grant Ranch would continue to grow and prosper over the coming years. Thomas would grow up to take over the ranch from his father, carrying on the family legacy. Sarah would become a teacher, bringing education to the children of Eager and the surrounding area. David would become a veterinarian, caring for the animals that were so essential to ranch life in the territory. But that was all in the future. For now, Victoria and Franklin had many more years ahead of them. Years filled with hard work and simple pleasures, challenges overcome and joys celebrated. They would weather droughts and harsh winters, celebrate births and mourn losses, see Arizona transform from territory to state. Through it all, they would have each other. The cowboy who had said, "Let's make those vows real," had kept his promise, and so had Victoria. Their love story, which had begun in such unlikely circumstances, had become the foundation of a family, a legacy that would endure for generations. As dawn broke over the mountains the next morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Victoria woke to find Franklin already up, standing by the window and looking out at the ranch. She rose and joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just counting my blessings," Franklin said, turning to smile at her. "I have more than any man deserves." "We both do," Victoria agreed. They stood together watching the sunrise. Two people who had found each other in the Wild West and made those vows real, building a love story that would stand the test of time. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they had promised on that June day when Victoria had said yes to a second chance at happiness and Franklin had offered her his heart. The rooster crowed from the chicken coop, signaling the start of a new day. Soon the children would wake, demanding breakfast and attention. There would be chores to do, work to complete, the endless tasks that came with running a ranch. But first, there was this moment, this quiet peace, this simple joy of standing beside the person you loved and knowing you were exactly where you belonged. Victoria turned her face up to Franklin's, and he kissed her gently. When they parted, both were smiling, ready to face whatever the day would bring. Together, they had built something precious and lasting. Together, they had made their vows real in every way that mattered. And together, they would continue to write their story one day at a time for all the years to come. The end.